sound that shattered the midnight silence wasn't a scream. It was something far more terrifying. A princess's desperate cry for help echoed through marble hallways where no one was supposed to hear her suffer. Within seconds, armed guards abandoned their posts and sprinted toward the royal chambers, their hearts pounding with a single horrifying thought: someone was hurting. Princess Charlotte, the spring morning had started like any other at Ashford Palace. Princess Charlotte Victoria Ashford sat in the grand breakfast hall, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, while her mother, Queen Eleanor, discussed wedding preparations with the event coordinator. Charlotte barely listened anymore. Every conversation in the palace seemed to circle back to the same topic: her upcoming marriage to Duke Frederick Harrington. Charlotte was 23 years old, with gentle brown eyes and auburn hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She had grown up within these palace walls, educated by the finest tutors, trained in diplomacy and royal etiquette. Everyone said she was blessed. Everyone said she was lucky. Everyone said she should be grateful that such a powerful man had chosen her as his bride. But Charlotte felt like a bird trapped in a golden cage, and the cage door was closing tighter each day. Duke Frederick was 42 years old, nearly twice her age. He came from one of the wealthiest families in the kingdom, with vast estates and political connections that made him nearly as powerful as the king himself. When he had asked for Charlotte's hand in marriage 6 months ago, her father had agreed immediately. The alliance would strengthen the kingdom, secure trade routes, and ensure peace with the northern territories. Nobody had asked Charlotte what she wanted. She had met Frederick only a handful of times before their engagement was announced. He was always polite in public, always proper, always playing the role of the perfect gentleman. But Charlotte noticed things others didn't see: the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the tightness in his grip when he took her hand, the cold calculation in his gaze when he thought no one was watching. Her concerns had been dismissed. Her mother called it wedding jitters. Her father said she was being dramatic. Her younger sister Emma said she was overthinking everything. Even her closest laddie-in-waiting, Margaret, told her she was fortunate to make such an advantageous match, so Charlotte stopped voicing her worries. She smiled during fittings for her wedding gown. She nodded politely during discussions about flower arrangements and seating charts. She pretended everything was fine, even though something deep in her gut told her it wasn't. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months away, but Frederick had requested that Charlotte spend more time at his estate to help plan the ceremony and adjust to her future home. The king had agreed. Arrangements were made for Charlotte to visit Harrington's manor for extended periods. That was when everything started to fall apart. The first visit had been 2 weeks ago. Charlotte arrived with Margaret and 4 royal guards for protection. Harrington Manor was impressive, a massive stone fortress surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. Frederick greeted her warmly, showed her through endless rooms filled with priceless artwork and antique furniture, and hosted an elaborate dinner in her honor. But that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Frederick came to her room. Charlotte had been sitting at the vanity, brushing her hair before sleep, when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting Margaret, but found Frederick instead. He was still fully dressed, and he closed the door behind him with a quiet click.
Your Grace,
Charlotte said, standing quickly. It's quite late. Is something wrong? Frederick smiled that cold smile. I simply wanted to speak with you privately, my dear, away from all the watchful eyes of the palace. Charlotte's heart started beating faster. Something about his tone made her uneasy. Perhaps we could speak tomorrow, during breakfast. It would be more appropriate. Frederick laughed softly, moving closer. We're to be married in a few months, Charlotte. Surely we can dispense with such formalities. He reached out and touched her hair, and Charlotte stepped back instinctively. Frederick's expression hardened for just a moment before the smile returned. You're nervous. I understand. But you need to learn that as my wife, you won't refuse me anything.
Oh.
Charlotte's mouth went dry. I think you should leave, Your Grace. Frederick's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. Not painfully, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away easily. I think you need to understand your position, my dear. Your father has given you to me. The contracts are signed. The wedding is planned. You belong to me now, whether the ceremony has happened yet or not. Charlotte tried to pull her arm free. Let go of me, or what? Frederick's voice dropped to a whisper. You'll run crying to your father? The king who was so eager to be rid of you that he practically threw you at me? The king who cares more about political alliances than his daughter's happiness? The words stung because they carried truth. Charlotte knew her father viewed her primarily as a political asset, but she refused to accept that her entire life had to be dictated by others. I'll scream. The guards will come. Frederick released her wrist and stepped back, his expression amused. Go ahead, scream. Tell them your future husband came to your room to talk. Tell them how frightened you are of simple conversation. See how that makes you look? He was right, and they both knew it. If Charlotte raised an alarm over something so seemingly innocent, she would appear hysterical, unreasonable, difficult. All the words women were called. When they objected to men's behavior, Frederick moved toward the door, then paused. I'll give you time to adjust, Charlotte. But understand this clearly. You will be my wife. And when you are, there will be no locked doors between us. No guards to hide behind. No running home to mother. You would do well to accept that now. He left, and Charlotte stood frozen in the middle of the room, trembling. She barely slept that night, jumping at every sound, terrified he would return. The next morning, Frederick was charming again at breakfast, discussing wedding plans as if nothing had happened. Charlotte played along, but she counted the hours until she could return to the palace. When she told Margaret what had happened, her lady-in-waiting had looked uncomfortable but offered little comfort. Men can be forward sometimes, Your Highness. It's their nature. The Duke was probably just eager to begin your life together. Charlotte had wanted to scream that it was more than that, but she didn't know how to explain the fear that had gripped her, the sense that she had seen something dark beneath. Frederick's polished exterior. She tried talking to her mother when she returned to the palace. But Queen Eleanor had waved off her concerns. All brides feel anxious before their wedding, darling. Marriage requires adjustment. Frederick comes from a good family. He'll provide well for you. Charlotte felt like she was shouting into a void where no one could hear her. The second visit to Harrington Manor was scheduled for this week. Charlotte had dreaded it. She had barely slept the night before departure, her stomach twisted in knots. But there was no way to refuse without causing a scandal. This time, Frederick had been more aggressive. He cornered her in the library on the first afternoon, when Margaret had stepped away momentarily. He pressed Charlotte against the bookshelf and kissed her roughly, ignoring her protests. When she shoved him away, he grabbed her shoulders hard enough to leave bruises. Stop fighting me, Frederick hissed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Charlotte had managed to slip past him and practically ran back to her chambers. She locked the door and refused to come out for dinner, claiming illness. Frederick sent a servant with a tray and a note that read, You can't hide forever, my dear. The next morning, Charlotte insisted on returning to the palace immediately. She fabricated a story about the queen needing her for urgent wedding preparations. Frederick had been coldly polite as she left, but his final words chilled her. Next time. There will be no cutting your visit short. Back at the palace. Charlotte sat in the breakfast hall, feeling trapped. The wedding was approaching rapidly. Soon she would belong to Frederick completely, with no escape. Charlotte, are you even listening? Queen Eleanor's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Charlotte looked up. I'm sorry, Mother. What were you saying? The final fitting for your gown is this afternoon. Please try to look more enthusiastic. Most girls would be thrilled. Charlotte forced a smile. Of course, Mother. I'm looking forward to it. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. But what choice did she have? She was a princess, and princesses didn't get to choose their own fate. They smiled, looked pretty, and did what they were told. As breakfast ended and Charlotte walked through the palace corridors toward her chambers, she felt the weight of invisible chains. Every step took her closer to a future she dreaded, and nobody seemed willing to listen to her fears. She didn't know then that everything was about to change. That within 48 hours, the entire palace would be in chaos. That her desperate cry would echo through marble halls and force everyone to finally pay attention. But for now, Charlotte simply walked to her room, closed the door, and allowed herself to cry where no one could see her tears. The next afternoon brought news that made Charlotte's heart sink. A messenger arrived from Harrington Manor with an invitation that was really a command. Duke Frederick was hosting a private dinner that evening in her honor, and he expected her attendance. "Just a small gathering," the message said. "Very intimate. Only close family and a few advisors." Charlotte wanted to refuse, but her mother wouldn't hear of it. Queen Eleanor insisted that maintaining good relations with the Duke was essential. The king agreed, barely looking up from his correspondence. So Charlotte found herself being dressed in an elegant emerald gown, her hair styled in elaborate curls, preparing for an evening she dreaded. The carriage ride to Harrington Manor felt like a journey to her own execution. Margaret sat across from her, chattering nervously about the weather and the upcoming wedding, clearly trying to fill the heavy silence. 2 royal guards rode alongside the carriage, their presence offering little comfort. Charlotte stared out the window at the darkening sky and wondered if anyone would notice if she simply opened the carriage door and ran. Frederick greeted her at the manor entrance with his usual polished charm. He took her hand and kissed it, his lips lingering just a moment too long. Charlotte forced herself not to flinch. There were servants watching, and she had learned to perform the role expected of her. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear," Frederick said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Come, everyone is waiting." The dinner party was small as promised. Frederick's elderly mother, Lady Harrington, sat at one end of the long table, her face pinched and disapproving. 2 of Frederick's advisors were present, both older men who spoke only to Frederick and ignored Charlotte completely. Frederick's younger brother, Lord Edmund, was there as well, quieter than the others, watching everything with careful eyes. Throughout dinner, Frederick played the perfect host. He was attentive to Charlotte, filling her wine glass repeatedly, insisting she'll try every dish. He told amusing stories that made his mother and advisors laugh. He spoke about their future together with apparent warmth and affection. But Charlotte noticed the possessive way his hand would rest on her arm, the tightness in his voice when she tried to participate in conversation and said something he didn't like, the cold flash in his eyes when she politely declined a 3rd glass of wine. As the evening wore on, Charlotte felt increasingly trapped. The dining room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Frederick's presence beside her felt suffocating. She kept glancing at the clock, counting the minutes until she could reasonably excuse herself and return to the palace. Finally, after dessert was served, Charlotte stood. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Your Grace, but I should return to the palace. It's getting quite late." Frederick stood as well, his hand immediately grasping her elbow. "Nonsense. The evening is still young. I thought we might take a walk in the garden. The moonlight is beautiful. I really should. I insist." His grip tightened just enough to make his point. "Lady Margaret can wait in the drawing room. We won't be long." Charlotte looked desperately at Margaret, but her lady-in-waiting simply nodded and stood to leave the dining room. The advisors had already excused themselves. Lady Harrington was being helped to her chambers by a servant. Only Lord Edmund remained, and he was staring at his wineglass as if fascinated by it. Frederick led Charlotte through the manor's back doors into the garden. The night air was cool, and Charlotte immediately regretted not bringing a shawl. Or perhaps Frederick had planned it that way. He removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, the gesture appearing gentlemanly, but feeling more like marking territory. They walked along a gravel path lined with rose bushes. The moon was indeed bright, casting silver light across the manicured grounds. In any other circumstances, it might have been romantic. But Charlotte felt only dread as Frederick guided her deeper into the garden, farther from the house. "You've been avoiding me," Frederick said quietly. His voice had lost its earlier warmth. "Cutting your visits short? Making excuses. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Charlotte's pulse quickened. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've simply had obligations at the palace." "Don't lie to me, Charlotte." Frederick stopped walking and turned to face her. "I don't appreciate dishonesty, especially not from my future wife. I'm not lying, you are." His hands gripped her shoulders, firm enough to hurt. "You're frightened of me. I can see it in your eyes every time I come near you. You pull away from my touch. You flinch when I speak to you. It's insulting." Charlotte tried to step back, but his grip held her in place. "You're hurting me. I'm barely touching you." Frederick's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You need to learn the difference between hurt and discomfort. You're acting like a child, Charlotte. Scared of her own shadow? Please let me go." "Why? So you can run back to your palace and hide in your chambers? So you can cry to your mother about how terrible I am?" Frederick's face was inches from hers now. "Your family doesn't care about your complaints. They sold you to me, and they're not taking you back." The words hit Charlotte like physical blows because she knew they were true. Her parents had made their choice. The contracts were signed. The wedding invitations had been sent. She was trapped, and Frederick knew it. "I want to leave," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Take me back inside. Margaret is waiting. Margaret will wait as long as I tell her to wait." Frederick's hands moved from her shoulders to her face, gripping her jaw and forcing her to look at him. "You need to understand something, Charlotte. In 3 months, you will be my wife. That means you belong to me. Your body belongs to me. Your time belongs to me. Your obedience belongs to me. The sooner you accept that, the easier things will be." Charlotte felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Let go of me now." For a moment, Frederick looked like he might strike her. His face twisted with anger, his grip tightening painfully. Then, slowly, he released her and stepped back. "Go then," he said coldly. "Run back to your guards and your lady-in-waiting. Pretend you're still a princess with choices. But remember this, Charlotte. After our wedding, there will be no running away. No guards to protect you. No palace to hide in. Just you and me, and I will expect complete obedience." Charlotte turned and walked quickly back toward the manor, fighting the urge to run. She could feel Frederick watching her, could sense his anger radiating like heat. When she reached the back door, she glanced over her shoulder and saw him still standing among the roses, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. Inside, Margaret was waiting in the drawing room, embroidery in her lap. She looked up with concern when Charlotte entered. "Your Highness, you're trembling. Are you cold?" Charlotte realized she was still wearing Frederick's jacket and yanked it off, letting it fall to the floor. "I want to leave. Now. But your Grace, it's quite late, and the Duke, I don't care. Get the guards. Tell them we're returning to the palace immediately." Something in Charlotte's voice must have convinced Margaret not to argue. Within minutes, they were in the carriage. Rolling away from Harrington Manor, Charlotte stared out the window, watching the manor shrink into the distance, and tried to calm her racing heart. She couldn't do this. She couldn't marry Frederick. The thought of spending her life with him, of being completely at his mercy, filled her with horror. But what choice did she have? The wedding was approaching like a storm she couldn't outrun. When they arrived at the palace, Charlotte went straight to her chambers and dismissed Margaret for the night. She needed to be alone to think, to figure out some way to escape her fate. But every path she considered led to the same dead end. She was a princess, and princesses didn't get to choose. Charlotte barely slept that night, her mind churning with fear and desperation. When morning came, she felt exhausted and hollow. She went through the motions of breakfast, dress fittings, and consultations about wedding flowers. She smiled when expected. She nodded at appropriate moments. She played her role perfectly. But inside, she was screaming. 3 days later, another message arrived from Frederick. He wanted Charlotte to visit again, this time for an extended stay of 5 days. The king agreed immediately, pleased that his daughter and her future husband were spending time together. Queen Eleanor reminded Charlotte to pack appropriate gowns and to be on her best behavior. Charlotte felt sick. 5 days at Harrington Manor. 5 days trapped with Frederick, far from the relative safety of the palace. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't survive it. But the next morning, she found herself once again in a carriage heading toward the manor. Margaret beside her, guards riding alongside. This time, Charlotte didn't even pretend to listen to Margaret's chatter. She sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. Preparing herself for what was coming, Frederick greeted her warmly when she arrived. All smiles and charm in front of the servants. He had planned an entire itinerary for her visit, he explained. Tours of the estate. Meetings with the household staff she would soon oversee. Time to review their future together. Charlotte nodded mechanically and allowed herself to be shown to her chambers. They were in a different wing of the manor this time, she noticed. Farther from the main rooms, more isolated. The first 2 days were manageable. Frederick was busy with estate business during the day. Charlotte spent time with Margaret, exploring the manor and trying to ignore her growing sense of dread. But on the third night, everything changed. Charlotte had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion. She locked her chamber door, something she had started doing automatically at the manor. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Her eyes flew open, heart pounding. The door opened, and Frederick stepped inside, closing it behind him. He was in his nightclothes, and he held a key in his hand. The master of the house has keys to all the rooms, Frederick said calmly, pocketing the key. Did you really think a lock could keep me out? Charlotte sat up quickly, pulling the blankets to her chest. Get out. You shouldn't be here. I'm exactly where I should be. Frederick moved toward the bed. We need to talk, Charlotte. About your behavior? About your attitude? About your continued resistance? I'll scream, Charlotte said, her voice shaking. The servants will hear. Your guards are housed in a separate building, quite far from here. The servants know better than to come running when the master is disciplining his household. And my mother's chambers are on the opposite side of the manor. Scream if you like. No one will come. The cold certainty in his voice terrified Charlotte more than anything else. He had planned this, orchestrated it. She was completely at his mercy, and he knew it. Frederick reached the bed and sat on the edge, and Charlotte scrambled backward until she hit the headboard. Stay away from me, or what? Frederick's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Yanking her toward him, Charlotte tried to pull away. But Frederick's grip was iron. He pulled her across the bed until their faces were close, his eyes cold and calculating in the dim lamplight. You're going to learn tonight, Frederick said quietly. You're going to learn that I am not a man to be denied, that your wishes don't matter, that resistance is pointless. Please, Charlotte whispered, terror flooding through her. Please don't do this. Don't do what? Assert my rights as your future husband. Teach you obedience? You've left me no choice, Charlotte. Your stubbornness has forced my hand. Frederick's free hand moved to her face, gripping her jaw roughly. Charlotte tried to scream, but he clamped his hand over her mouth. None of that. We're going to have a civilized conversation about your future behavior, and you're going to listen. Charlotte's mind raced frantically. She was alone with him, trapped in a room far from help. No one knew what was happening. No one would come. Frederick had made sure of that. She felt tears streaming down her face as Frederick began speaking in a low, menacing voice about everything he expected from her as his wife. Complete obedience. Absolute submission. No questions. No resistance. Then he released her mouth, and Charlotte did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. Not just a scream of fear, but a desperate cry for help that came from the depths of her soul. It hurts. Please stop. Someone help me. Frederick's face twisted with fury. His hand rose to strike her, but something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the genuine terror in her eyes. Maybe it was the volume of her screams echoing through the manor. Maybe it was the sudden sound of commotion outside, voices shouting, footsteps running. What Frederick didn't know was that Charlotte's guards had not been housed as far away as he thought. The captain of her guard, Sir Marcus, had insisted on keeping his men closer to the wing where Charlotte stayed. He trusted Frederick about as far as he could throw the manor itself, and years of service had taught him to trust his instincts. When Charlotte's screams pierced the night, Sir Marcus was already halfway to her chambers, his sword drawn. Behind him, 3 more guards thundered through the corridors. They had been doing routine patrols. Despite Frederick's insistence that such measures weren't necessary within his home, the guards reached Charlotte's door within seconds. Sir Marcus didn't bother knocking. He threw his shoulder against the wood with all his strength. The lock held, but barely. The second impact splintered the doorframe. The third sent the door crashing open. Sir Marcus burst into the room, sword raised, expecting to find an assassin or intruder. What he found was worse. Duke Frederick, still in his nightclothes, standing beside Princess Charlotte's bed. Charlotte herself pressed against the headboard, her face streaked with tears. Her nightgown torn at the shoulder, terror written across every feature. For a long moment, nobody moved. The scene was damning. The implications clear. Sir Marcus felt cold rage wash over him. He had served the royal family for 15 years. He had watched Princess Charlotte grow from a child into a kind, gentle young woman. And here was the man she was supposed to marry, the man who should have protected her, instead terrorizing her in her own chambers. "Step away from the princess, sir," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. Now, Frederick's face went through several expressions rapidly. Surprise, anger, then calculation. He held up his hands in a gesture of innocence. "There's been a misunderstanding. The princess had a nightmare. I heard her cries and came to check on her well-being, the key to her locked chambers." Sir Marcus's eyes flicked to the key lying on the bedside table. "In the middle of the night? In your nightclothes? I am the master of this house. You are not the master of the Princess of Ashford." Sir Marcus moved further into the room, placing himself between Frederick and Charlotte. The other guards filed in behind him, weapons drawn. "Your Highness, are you harmed?" Charlotte was shaking so badly she could barely speak. I want to leave, please. I want to go home. We'll take you home immediately, Your Highness." Sir Marcus never took his eyes off Frederick. "Your Grace, you will remain in this room until we have safely escorted the princess from your manor. If you attempt to follow or interfere, my men have orders to ensure your compliance." Frederick's face darkened with fury. "You dare threaten me? In my own home? I am a duke of this realm. The king himself approved this engagement. You have no authority here. Have the authority given to me by the king to protect his daughter from all threats, including threats that come from behind locked doors in the middle of the night." Sir Marcus gestured to one of his guards. "Assist the princess. Help her dress and gather her belongings. We leave immediately." The guard, a young man named Thomas who had always been kind to Charlotte, moved to her side. Charlotte wrapped a blanket around herself and allowed Thomas to help her stand. Her legs felt like water, barely supporting her weight. Frederick took a step toward them, and Sir Marcus's sword rose in warning. "I wouldn't, Your Grace. This is an outrage. The king will hear of this. You'll all be dismissed for this insubordination. Arrested, the princess is my betrothed. I have rights. You have no rights to enter a locked chamber uninvited. You have no rights to terrorize a woman who is under royal protection." Oh. Sir Marcus's voice was steel. "And when the king hears what happened here tonight, I suspect your upcoming wedding will be the least of your concerns." Frederick's eyes blazed with impotent rage, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. 4 armed guards stood between him and Charlotte, and he knew that if he made a move, they wouldn't hesitate to respond with force. His carefully constructed plan had fallen apart spectacularly. Margaret had appeared in the doorway, wakened by the commotion, her face pale with shock. She quickly moved to help Charlotte, bringing clothes and helping her dress with shaking hands. Charlotte moved like a sleepwalker, mechanically putting on a dress, allowing Margaret to fasten buttons and tie ribbons. Within 10 minutes, Charlotte was dressed and ready to leave. Sir Marcus ordered 2 guards to escort her and Margaret down to the carriages while he and Thomas remained to ensure Frederick didn't follow. As Charlotte passed through the doorway, she looked back once at Frederick. His face was twisted with fury, but beneath that, she saw something else. Humiliation. His power over her had been broken by 4 guards who refused to look the other way. The carriage ride back to the palace was silent, except for Charlotte's quiet sobs. Margaret held her close, murmuring soothing words, but nothing could ease the terror of what had happened. Charlotte had been seconds away from something unspeakable. If Sir Marcus hadn't been close enough to hear, if the guards hadn't come when they did, she couldn't stop shaking. Couldn't stop seeing Frederick's face as he loomed over her. Couldn't stop hearing his cold voice promising to teach her obedience. She wrapped her arms around herself and cried until there were no tears left. When they arrived at the palace, it was the middle of the night. Sir Marcus immediately requested an audience with the king, despite the late hour. This couldn't wait. The king needed to know what had happened before Frederick had a chance to spin the story his own way. King Robert Rosé was not pleased to be awakened in the middle of the night. He arrived in the throne room in his nightclothes, Queen Eleanor beside him, both looking irritated at the disturbance. But Sir Marcus's grave expression quickly wiped the annoyance from their faces. "What's happened?" the king demanded. "Why have you returned from Harrington Manor in the middle of the night?" Sir Marcus took a breath and delivered his report with military precision. The screams in the night, the locked door, Frederick's presence in Charlotte's chambers, the princess's torn nightgown and terrified state, every damning detail. The king's face grew darker with each word. Queen Eleanor had gone pale, one hand pressed to her mouth. When Sir Marcus finished, silence filled the throne room like a weight. "Where is Charlotte now?" the queen asked quietly. "In her chambers, your majesty." "With her lady-in-waiting. She's very shaken." Queen Eleanor stood immediately. "I must go to her." "Wait." The king's voice was hard. "Sir Marcus, you're certain about what you saw? There's no possibility of misunderstanding?" "I am absolutely certain, your majesty." The princess was in genuine distress. Duke Frederick entered her locked chambers uninvited in the middle of the night. His intentions were clear. King Robert's jaw clenched. He had prided himself on making a brilliant match for his daughter. The Harrington alliance was meant to secure the kingdom's northern borders, establish valuable trade routes, and strengthen their position among the noble houses. Frederick had seemed like the perfect choice. Powerful, wealthy, politically connected. But the king was many things, including a father, and no political alliance was worth what Sir Marcus was describing. "Send for my advisors," King Robert said grimly. "Immediately. And send word to Duke Frederick that he is not to leave his manor until he receives permission from the crown. The engagement is suspended pending investigation." "Your Majesty," Sir Marcus said carefully, "I would recommend more than suspension. What I witnessed tonight was an attempt at assault against the crown princess. That's not simply a broken engagement. It's a crime against the royal family." The king nodded slowly. "Summon the advisors. Now, we'll decide the duke's fate before morning." Sir Marcus bowed and left to carry out the orders. Queen Eleanor hurried toward Charlotte's chambers. The king remained seated on his throne, staring at nothing, grappling with the realization that he had nearly delivered his daughter into a monster's hands. In her chambers, Charlotte sat curled in a chair by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, still trembling. When her mother entered, Charlotte looked up with haunted eyes. "Mama," she whispered. It was what she had called her mother as a small child, before royal protocol had made their relationship more formal. Queen Eleanor crossed the room in seconds and gathered Charlotte into her arms. "My darling girl. My sweet Charlotte. I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry we didn't listen. That we didn't see." Charlotte buried her face in her mother's shoulder and cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. All the fear, all the terror, all the weeks of trying to tell people something was wrong and being dismissed came pouring out in great heaving sobs. "I tried to tell you," Charlotte gasped between sobs. "I tried to say something was wrong with him, but nobody would listen. Nobody cared." I know, and I failed you. Your father failed you. We were so focused on the political benefits that we ignored what you were trying to tell us." Queen Eleanor held her daughter tighter. "But I promise you, Charlotte. I promise on everything I hold sacred. You will never have to see that man again. You will never marry him. I don't care what political consequences follow. You are my daughter, and I will protect you." It was the first time in months that Charlotte felt even remotely safe. Her mother's arms around her, her mother's promise in her ears. The knowledge that she didn't have to go back to Harrington Manor, that she didn't have to marry Frederick. Outside, the palace was coming alive with activity. Advisors were being roused from their beds. Messages were being sent. Guards were being posted. The machinery of royal justice was grinding into motion. And at its center was Duke Frederick Harrington, whose carefully laid plans had crumbled into dust. But for Charlotte, in that moment, none of that mattered. She was home. She was safe. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. The next morning brought chaos to the palace. By dawn, every member of the royal council had assembled in the throne room. News of the incident at Harrington Manor had spread through the palace like wildfire, and whispers filled every corridor. The servants spoke in hushed voices. The nobles exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew something significant had happened, even if they didn't know the full details. Charlotte remained in her chambers, unable to face the world yet. Queen Eleanor stayed with her through the night, refusing to leave her daughter's side. Margaret brought tea and breakfast, though Charlotte could barely eat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Frederick's face, felt his hand gripping her wrist, heard his cold voice promising to teach her obedience. In the throne room, King Robert sat with his council, his face carved from stone. Sir Marcus stood before them, repeating his account of the previous night. Every detail was examined, questioned, verified. The torn nightgown had been preserved as evidence. The splintered door at Harrington Manor stood as testament to the guards' forced entry. Thomas and the other guards who had witnessed the scene provided their own statements. Lord Chancellor Edmund, the king's oldest advisor, spoke gravely. "Your Majesty, the evidence is clear. Duke Frederick entered the princess's locked chambers without permission in the middle of the night. His intentions were unmistakably hostile. This is not simply a matter of broken engagement protocols. This is assault against a member of the royal family." "But what of the political ramifications?" another advisor asked nervously. "The Harrington alliance was meant to secure our northern borders. Duke Frederick controls vast territories. His family has significant influence among the noble houses. Breaking the engagement will create enemies." King Robert's fist slammed down on the throne's armrest, making several advisors jump. "My daughter was terrorized in her own bed. She screamed for help while a man twice her age attempted to force himself upon her. And you're concerned about political ramifications?" The advisor paled and fell silent. "The engagement is dissolved," the king declared, effective immediately. "All contracts are void. All wedding preparations are to cease. And Duke Frederick Harrington is hereby summoned to the palace to answer for his crimes." "Your Majesty," Lord Chancellor Edmund said carefully, "with respect, the Duke is unlikely to come willingly. He knows what awaits him here. He'll probably flee to his northern estates and rally his allies. Then send the royal guard to ensure his attendance, by force if necessary." The council erupted in murmurs of concern. Arresting a duke was no small matter. It could spark conflict among the noble houses, potentially even lead to civil unrest. But King Robert was unmoved. He had spent the entire night thinking about what Sir Marcus had described, about his daughter's screams echoing through Harrington Manor, about how close she had come to unspeakable harm. "I want Frederick in custody by tonight," the king ordered. "Assign 50 guards under Sir Marcus's command. Bring him here in chains if you must." Sir Marcus bowed deeply, satisfaction flickering across his weathered face. He had served the crown for 15 years, but this was the order he was most eager to carry out. "It will be done, Your Majesty." Within the hour, Sir Marcus rode out with 50 mounted guards, all armed and armored for potential conflict. The journey to Harrington Manor took most of the morning. As they approached, Sir Marcus prepared for resistance. Frederick had household guards of his own, and he might attempt to fight rather than submit to arrest. But when they arrived, they found the manor in an uproar of a different kind. Servants were running everywhere, packing belongings into carriages. Frederick's mother was screaming at staff members, and Frederick himself was preparing to flee. Sir Marcus didn't give him the chance. The royal guards surrounded the manor before Frederick could leave. When Sir Marcus entered the main hall, he found Frederick dressed for travel, a packed trunk beside him, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Duke Frederick Harrington," Sir Marcus said formally, "by order of King Robert of Ashford, you are under arrest for assault against Princess Charlotte Victoria Ashford. You will come with us to the palace to answer these charges." Frederick's face went red with rage. "This is an outrage. I am a duke. You cannot arrest me like a common criminal. I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you entered the princess's chambers uninvited and attempted to force yourself upon her." Sir Marcus signaled to his men. "Take him." 4 guards moved forward. Frederick backed away, his hand moving toward the sword at his hip. But he was outnumbered 50-1, and he knew it. His household guards stood frozen, unwilling to defend their master against the king's men. They had heard the whispers about what had happened, about the princess's screams, about Frederick being caught in her chambers. Nobody wanted to die defending a man who had assaulted the crown princess. Frederick's hand dropped from his sword. His shoulders sagged as reality crashed over him. His carefully built reputation was destroyed. His political power was gone. His future as Charlotte's husband and potential influence over the throne had vanished the moment Sir Marcus's boot had splintered that chamber door. The guards clapped Frederick in irons and led him out to a prison wagon. Lady Harrington shrieked from an upper window, but nobody paid her any attention. Frederick's brother, Lord Edmund, watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had witnessed Frederick's cruelty over the years, had seen the darkness beneath his brother's polished exterior. Part of him felt only relief that Frederick had finally been stopped. The return journey to the palace was slow, the prison wagon heavily guarded. Frederick sat in chains, his face alternating between rage and fear. He knew what awaited him. Arrest was bad enough, but for assault against the crown princess, the penalties could be severe. Exile, at minimum. Possibly prison. Perhaps even execution, depending on how far the king's fury extended. By the time they reached the palace, word had spread throughout the city. Crowds lined the streets watching in shock as Duke Frederick Harrington was paraded through the capital in chains. The man who had been celebrated as the princess's future husband just days ago was now a criminal. The whispers were everywhere. What had he done? Why was he arrested? Was the princess safe? Charlotte heard the commotion from her chambers. She moved to the window and saw the prison wagon entering the palace grounds, saw Frederick being led inside by guards. For a moment, fear flooded through her, the same terror she had felt the night before. But then she realized something important. Frederick was the one in chains now. Frederick was the one being led away by guards. Frederick was the one whose power had crumbled. She was safe, protected, and he would never be able to hurt her again. Queen Eleanor joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Do you want to attend the trial? You have every right to face him, to speak about what he did. But you also have the right to stay here, to let the evidence speak for itself." Charlotte considered carefully. Part of her never wanted to see Frederick again. But another part, a stronger part, wanted to look him in the eye and let him know that he hadn't broken her, that his attempt to control and terrorize her had failed. "I'll attend," Charlotte said quietly. "I want him to see that I'm not afraid anymore." The trial was held that very afternoon in the palace's great hall. The room was packed with nobles, advisors, and court officials. King Robert sat on his throne, Queen Eleanor beside him. Charlotte sat with her family, her sister Emma holding her hand tightly. Margaret stood behind her, a silent support. Frederick was brought in wearing chains, his fine clothes rumpled, his hair disheveled. He looked diminished somehow, stripped of the polish and charm he usually wore like armor. When his eyes found Charlotte across the room, she met his gaze steadily and didn't look away. Lord Chancellor Edmund read the charges formally. "Duke Frederick Harrington, you stand accused of unlawful entry into the chambers of Princess Charlotte Victoria Ashford, of assault with intent to harm, of terrorizing a member of the royal family. How do you plead?" Frederick's jaw clenched. "Not guilty. I entered the princess's chambers out of concern for her well-being. I heard her cry out and thought she was in distress. My intentions were entirely honorable." Sir Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying through the hall. "That's a lie, Your Grace. When we entered the room, the princess was terrified. Her nightgown was torn. You had a key to her locked chamber, which you had clearly used without permission. The door was locked from the inside, indicating the princess did not want anyone entering. Your presence there at that hour, in your nightclothes demonstrates clear malicious intent. The guards who had witnessed the scene gave their testimonies. Thomas described Charlotte's tear-streaked face, her trembling, the way she had begged to go home. The other guards confirmed the splintered door, the torn nightgown, Frederick's aggressive stance. Then Charlotte was called to speak. The hall fell silent as she stood and walked to the center of the room. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, could hear the whispers, but she kept her head high and her voice steady. "Duke Frederick did not enter my chambers out of concern," Charlotte said clearly. "He entered with a key, after I had locked my door specifically to keep him out. This was not the first time he had behaved inappropriately toward me. For weeks I tried to tell people that something was wrong, that he frightened me, that his behavior was threatening, but I was dismissed. Told I was being dramatic. Told I was lucky to be marrying such a powerful man." Her voice grew stronger. "That night, he told me I belonged to him, that my body belonged to him, that after our wedding, he would expect complete obedience. When I tried to resist, when I tried to make him leave, he refused. He grabbed me. He threatened me. And if Sir Marcus and the guards hadn't come when they did, I don't know what would have happened." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Several noble ladies covered their mouths in horror. Even some of the hardened advisors looked disturbed. Frederick tried to protest. "She's lying. She's fabricating stories because she wanted to break the engagement. This is all a scheme enough." King Robert's voice thundered through the hall. "I have heard testimony from 4 separate guards, all men of impeccable character and long service. I have seen physical evidence. I have heard my daughter's account, and I believe her. You entered her chambers uninvited with the intent to force yourself upon her. You terrorized her. And then you attempted to flee justice rather than face the consequences of your actions." The king stood, and the weight of royal authority filled every corner of the hall. "Frederick Harrington, formerly Duke of the Northern Territories, you are hereby stripped of your title and lands. You are sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for assault against the Crown Princess. Your estates will be forfeit to the Crown. Your family's holdings will be redistributed, and you are forever banished from any position of authority or influence within this kingdom." Frederick's face went white. The sentence was devastating. He would lose everything: his title, his wealth, his power, his freedom. All because he had underestimated a princess who looked fragile but possessed a core of steel. "You can't do this," Frederick shouted, struggling against his chains. "I am a duke. My family has served this kingdom for generations. You cannot destroy us over the hysterical claims of a frightened girl." King Robert's eyes were ice. "You destroyed yourself the moment you laid hands on my daughter. Take him away." Guards dragged Frederick from the hall as he screamed protests and threats. The doors closed behind him, cutting off his voice. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear that had been tightening for months finally releasing. It was over. Frederick was gone. She was free. The weeks that followed brought profound changes to the kingdom. Frederick's imprisonment sent shockwaves through the noble houses. Several families who had allied with the Harringtons quickly distanced themselves. Others stepped forward to offer support to the crown, praising the king's swift justice. There were some who grumbled that Frederick's punishment was too harsh. The king had overreacted to protect his daughter. But these voices were quickly silenced when other stories began to emerge. Women who had encountered Frederick over the years would experience his inappropriate behavior, his aggressive advances, his threats. The pattern was clear. Charlotte had not been his first victim. She had simply been the first with the power and platform to hold him accountable. Charlotte herself began a slow process of healing. She still had nightmares sometimes, waking up gasping from dreams where Frederick's face loomed over her. But Margaret was always there, and her mother visited daily, and slowly the terror began to fade. Princess Emma, Charlotte's younger sister, became her fierce defender. She spread the word throughout the palace, and beyond that, anyone who criticized Charlotte for ruining. The Harrington alliance would answer to her personally. At 17, Emma might have been younger than Charlotte, but she had inherited their father's temper and their mother's determination. Sir Marcus became something of a hero in Charlotte's eyes. She requested that he be officially promoted to captain of the royal guard. personally rewarded for his quick action and unwavering loyalty. The king agreed immediately, and Sir Marcus accepted the honor with his typical humble grace. Several months after the trial, Charlotte was walking in the palace gardens when she encountered Lord Edmund, Frederick's younger brother. She tensed instinctively, but Edmund stopped at a respectful distance and bowed deeply. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you, if you'll permit it." Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "Speak." "I wanted to apologize," Edmund said quietly, "for my brother's actions, for my family's role in what happened to you. I should have spoken up years ago about Frederick's behavior. I saw things, heard things, but I remained silent because he was my brother, because I was afraid of creating family conflict. My silence enabled him to hurt you, and for that I am deeply sorry." Charlotte studied him carefully. Edmund looked genuinely remorseful, his eyes sad and tired. She remembered him at that dinner party, watching everything with careful eyes. Perhaps he had known even then what Frederick was capable of. "Your apology is noted," Charlotte said finally. "But understand that silence in the face of wrongdoing is its own form of participation. If you truly wish to make amends, speak up in the future. When you see someone being hurt, don't wait until it's too late to act." Edmund nodded slowly. "You're right, Your Highness, and I will. I promise you that." As he walked away, Charlotte felt a strange sense of peace. She hadn't forgiven Edmund. Not really. But she had acknowledged his apology and spoken her truth. That felt like enough. More months passed. The wedding that never happened became a cautionary tale told throughout the kingdom, about the importance of listening to women when they raise concerns, about how power and status don't give anyone the right to hurt others, about the courage it takes to speak up when everyone around you wants you to stay silent. Charlotte eventually began considering marriage again, but on her own terms this time. She insisted on long courtships, on getting to know potential suitors thoroughly, on trusting her own instincts about people, and most importantly, on having the absolute right to refuse anyone for any reason. Her parents, chastened by their earlier failure, agreed to every condition. They would never again prioritize political alliances over their daughter's safety and happiness. When Charlotte finally did marry, 3 years later, it was to a kind scholar named David, who made her laugh and treated her with genuine respect. He wasn't a duke. He didn't control vast estates. He didn't offer significant political advantages. But he loved Charlotte for who she was, not for what she could give him. And that, Charlotte had learned, was worth more than all the political power in the kingdom. On her wedding day, as Charlotte walked down the aisle in a gown of her own choosing, toward a man she had selected herself, she caught sight of Sir Marcus standing guard. He gave her a small nod, and she smiled back. Without his quick action that terrible night, none of this would have been possible. She would have been trapped with Frederick, suffering in silence, with no escape. Instead, she was free. She was happy. She was marrying for love. And Duke Frederick Harrington was exactly where he belonged, locked away where he could never hurt anyone again. After the ceremony, during the celebration, Charlotte found a quiet moment to stand on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The same gardens where Frederick had once threatened her, the same palace where she had felt so trapped and powerless. But everything had changed. She had found her voice. She had spoken her truth. She had been believed and protected, and she had survived. Queen Eleanor joined her on the balcony, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Happy, my dear." Charlotte leaned against her mother and smiled. "Yes, truly happy. For the first time in years. Good. That's all I ever wanted for you. Happiness, safety, the freedom to choose your own path." Queen Eleanor squeezed her shoulders gently. "I'm proud of you, Charlotte. For your courage, for your strength, for refusing to let that monster break you." "I almost did break," Charlotte admitted quietly. "If the guards hadn't come when they did, if Sir Marcus hadn't trusted his instincts, if you and Father hadn't finally listened, things could have ended very differently, but they didn't. Guess you screamed because you fought, because you refused to suffer in silence even when everyone told you to accept your fate." Queen Eleanor turned Charlotte to face her. "You've saved yourself, my darling. The guards came because you called for help. Your father acted because you finally made us understand the truth. Never forget that your voice, your courage, made all the difference. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. Tears of relief and joy and gratitude. She had survived. She had healed. She had found happiness again, and somewhere in a prison cell in the darkest corner of the kingdom. Frederick Harrington sat alone with his ruined reputation and lost power, living proof that cruelty and abuse would not be tolerated, no matter how powerful the abuser might believe himself to be. Justice, Charlotte had learned, wasn't always swift. But when it came, when people finally listened and believed and acted, it was powerful enough to change everything. She took one last look at the gardens, at the palace, at the life she had built for herself after everything had fallen apart. Then she turned and walked back into her wedding celebration, into her new life, into the future she had fought so hard to claim. She was Princess Charlotte Victoria Ashford. She was a survivor. She was strong. And she was finally, beautifully, completely free.